Hey, you! Yeah, you. Looking at me right now. Hey, what's up again? I'm Michael Montero for Boxing Monthly. You're watching the Neutral Corner for the week of March 4th. Okay, so we got a lot to discuss. So I promise you, this is going to be a long episode, but I promise you I'm going to do some timestamps. Just give me a minute to get all that stuff up there. It'll be in the video description. For right now, let's get into some news and notes. So the big news coming out on Twitter this week is from Manny Pacquiao. Looks like he's going to be fighting Amir Khan April 23rd. Now, this thing isn't 100% confirmed, but terms are agreed to. So that means all the money and all that's agreed to by both fighters. They want it, their teams, all that. Just some of the details have to be ironed out. As of the time I'm filming this, there's no location set, there's no venue. We don't know what continent this fight's gonna be in. So there's talk that it might be in the United Arab Emirates. Of course, just a month or so ago, Pacquiao was supposed to be facing Australian fighter Jeff Horn, who is his mandatory. And man, I did a rant video on that. We did an episode of 10 Counts on Undisputed Champion Network. There were all kinds of articles and videos done all over the place in the boxing community about that matchup. And Bob Arum was going around talking about a world tour for Manny Pacquiao this year. 3, maybe 4 fights. And I remember when I did that rant video about Pacquiao Horn, I remember saying, you know, I'll believe it when I see it. I was optimistic, I gave him the benefit of the doubt, but I thought we're probably gonna see Pacquiao fight twice this year. And that's what this has fallen into. So, a lot of you have asked how I feel about this matchup. I need to think more about it. I need to see where the venue is going to be. I need to see what kind of drug testing is going to be involved. With Pacquiao's been doing VADA the last few years, and I have no reason to think that Amir Khan wouldn't jump on with that. So not that I'm trying to cast any aspersions about either of these guys or anything like that. It's just Amir Khan, blew up in weight for his last fight, would be coming back down for this fight. I believe this would be a welterweight, 147-pound fight. So there's a lot of intangibles that got to be worked out. On the surface, at this point in Pacquiao's career, he's so faded that a guy like Amir Khan, who's bigger, taller, longer, I don't know if he's stronger. I think Pacquiao's probably got naturally, just at least in his legs, he's a stronger guy. Amir Khan might be stronger overall, though, because he's so much bigger. But with all the skills and with the size and the style that Amir Khan brings, I think this is going to be a competitive fight. I think it's going to be interesting. And things like venue and all that stuff, glove size, ring size, all that stuff's going to play a factor here. So I'm waiting to see all those details before I really get into the breakdown of this fight. On the surface, though, you got to think, okay, Amir Khan will be just competitive enough to win rounds, put some leather on Manny to make it interesting until Pacquiao lands some crazy shot from a weird angle from that southpaw stance that Amir Khan doesn't see coming and he gets hurt. In his last fight, he was fighting basically a middleweight who kills himself to make Canelo weight, right? Canelo Alvarez. And he took a monster punch from him. Every time a fighter gets concussively knocked out like that, their knockout reflex gets weaker. So even though Pacquiao is not nearly as big and strong, doesn't hit nearly as hard as Canelo, he's still got that power. And even at this stage in his career, he's been putting guys down in recent fights. Hasn't been knocking them out, but he's been knocking them down. And you got to think a cumulative kind of stoppage, maybe late knockout, something like that for Pacquiao. But this thing, probably, hate to say it, probably go the distance and Pacquiao wins a decision. So that's what I think right now. More to come on that. Let's talk about some WBC mandatories. Now, you guys remember, I think I talked about this with Eleider Alvarez, who is a Montreal-based, Colombian-born light heavyweight that had a fight last Friday, which I'll talk about in a second. He's been the mandatory for the WBC for Adonis Stevenson since 2015, I believe. And this fight against Lucien Boutte, who should not have been fighting, considering his drug test results recently. But anyway, they just fought for the millionth WBC light heavyweight title eliminator. So now the WBC finally stepped in and said that there is a purse bid situation, which I think is going to be March 24th for the two of them. Eleider Alvarez and Adonis Stevenson. So they have about a month to come to figure a deal out, or else this thing's going to purse bid. So it looks like finally that mandatory matchup is going to happen. More about Alvarez in a second in his fight with Butte. We'll talk about that in the fight review. Another WBC mandatory involving a fighter I'll talk more about later. Deontay Wilder is going to fight Thurman-Garcia again. Now this is one that makes absolutely no sense. Absolutely no sense. These two fought in January of 2015. They were supposed to fight earlier in 2014, but there was fuckery going on. There was supposed injuries. There was all these delays. Their fight finally happened in January 2015. And by the time it finally happened, Thurman-Garcia, because he was so lazy in between fight camps and had blown up to almost 300 pounds, just looked like a shell of himself against Wilder. Now, Deontay, to his credit, boxed smart, stayed behind the jab, and won a 12-round shutout decision over Stavern. And Stavern was in such bad shape afterwards. I think he was suffering from dehydration. He went to the hospital after that fight. Didn't fight again until that November 2015. Fought Derek Rossi, a journeyman who's fought everybody, right, at heavyweight. Rossi put him down, I think, in the first round of that fight. Stavern came back and won, I believe, a decision. He came back to win a decision against Rossi. He didn't stop him. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But that's what Stavern did in 2015. Sat on the shelf in 2016. Now, to his credit, he was supposed to fight Alexander Povetkin, and there was a whole situation there. We all been down that road a few times. But the bottom line is, he sat on the shelf all of 2016. He did absolutely nothing. And regardless of how you feel about the drug testing situation with Povetkin and Stavern, because he popped, he drank an energy drink, and one of the ingredients in the energy drink was a banned substance. And he didn't even look at that. So he got in trouble. Povetkin got in trouble the second time. The WBC pulled sanctioning from that fight. That fight was supposed to be for the WBC, I think, interim or silver, or one of the billion titles they have. Basically, the mandatory to face Deontay Wilder. I understand that the sanctioning was pulled from that fight. So when Povetkin fought, that wasn't a WBC sanctioned fight. But Stavern didn't fight. So why would you reward him, the mandatory, for not fighting? Especially considering the fact that he had failed a test. And I've explained all the nuance for that, and he was punished, and everything has been handled, and he's basically on the same probationary status, or a similar one, that Povetkin was put on. And if he pops again, he's out of the WBC ratings totally. But you got a guy in a probationary situation like that, hasn't fought in over a year, and you make him the mandatory. The WBC has just been fucking up lately. This thing with Lucien Butte, which I talked about, he shouldn't have been fighting for a possible title shot last week. They've dropped the ball on the Stevenson-Alvarez mandatory that's been due for like 2 years. Adonis Stevenson himself hasn't fought a mandatory since he fought Tony Bellew in November of 2013. That's the last mandatory Adonis Stevenson's fought. So the WBC, with some of their champions, it's really interesting because they stripped Canelo Alvarez for that fighting Gennady Golovkin last year. That was more so due to Tom Loeffler's genius chess playing and having Canelo's balls in a vice, and the WBC too, and there was nothing they could do. They had to give up that title. But there's situations involving Adonis Stevenson and now Deontay Wilder where the other promoters are not getting their fighters lined up for that title as well, and these guys are kind of being protected. So with Thurman-Garcia, I don't know how he got this mandatory shot again. And for Alvarez, I don't know what the hell took so long, but that's up with the WBC mandatory. So basically, we're finally going to have Stevenson and Alvarez fight. And at some point this year, depending on what happens with Deontay Wilder, more about that in a second, we're going to see Wilder-Stavern 2, a fight nobody wants. What else? Okay, well, since I was talking about Wilder, let's just stay on that. Here's some good news. Maybe good news, maybe bad news. I think it's mostly positive. The PBC on Fox rating for Wilder in Washington did an average of 1.76 million. It peaked at 1.86 million. Now, that's down from when Wilder fought Johann Duhaupas in September of 2015, and that was on NBC. That fight peaked at 2.36 million. But here's the nuance, okay? This PBC on Fox card was going up against head-to-head against an NBA game on ABC and an NHL game on NBC. Now, both the NBA and NHL, they're not in the playoff season yet, but they're past their All-Star game and heading into the home stretch toward playoff season. So their viewership is trending upward right now as they head toward the playoffs. So the NBA game did a peak of 2.43 million, and the NHL game did a peak of 1.91 million. And I believe the NHL game was one of those outdoor games that they do that do pretty high ratings. And those are fun games. Even if you're not a big hockey fan, when I see those games on, when they do the games out in an outdoor arena, I watch them for a while. They're fun. So considering all the competition, head-to-head with the NBA is a huge brand in America. The NHL is more of a regional sport. But this fight card was more of a regional card when you think about it. You know, Wilder has been on the shelf for a while. He was going up against a replacement opponent. His original opponent was not well known. Neither was his replacement opponent. And all the other fighters on the card are not very well known. None of these were star fighters. Wilder was the name, and going up head-to-head, considering who he was fighting, going up against the NBA, NHL, I think this was a pretty good rating. There's the positive news, okay? Now let's get to some of the negative news. Unless you've been sleeping under a rock, look, if you're on Twitter, if you're a diehard boxing fan, and you must be if you're watching this, you know about the brawl between Deontay Wilder and Dominic Breazeale in the Westin Birmingham Hotel, which is right across the street from the Legacy Arena there in Birmingham, Alabama. It was the Fight Hotel. Now, I've talked to several people who were at that fight and who were either staying at that Westin Hotel, stayed there the whole week, over the weekend, or were at least there when this thing went down. I've talked to multiple sources involved in the fight camps. I'm not going to name names or say who they are, but this is the entire picture that I've gathered from multiple sources, okay? And I understand that Dominic Breazeale's put out statements, Deontay Wilder's put out statements. Okay. Deontay Wilder's brother, Marsellos, had been kind of mouthing off and talking shit to people all week. All week. Several people who are not even media. I know a guy who went to the fight. He works in boxing, a great, awesome guy, but he's not a part of the media. He works in boxing trying to help fighters and bring knowledge to fighters and stuff like that. And he does some occasional reporting. He has a background in that. But he went to this fight as a fan and was sitting in the stands. And as a matter of fact, I saw him. I was watching TV and hit him up like, yo, I see you. And Marsellos Wilder talked shit to him a couple times because he was just giving his opinion. And I think it was either during the weigh-in or the last press conference before the fight. He's not even related to the fighters. He's just a fan, you know, who's kind of in with some camps and stuff. But he was talking shit to this guy. Marsellos was talking shit to Dominic Breazeale's kids during the Deontay Wilder-Gerald Washington fight because Dominic Breazeale, of course, fought on the undercard. We'll talk more about that in a second. But after that fight, he was the opening bout on the Fox broadcast. Him and his kids and his wife got back ringside. Were watching the fight. Breazeale works with Gerald Washington a lot. They train together. They spar together a lot in the Valley here in Los Angeles. They know each other well. They're both former football players. Their camps know each other. They're friends. Their families know each other, okay? So the kids were kind of polling, obviously, for Gerald Washington, during the fight with Deontay Wilder. And Marsellos Wilder took some issue with that. It was talking shit to kids. They're older than toddlers. I don't know what you call kids who are like between 5 and 10, but that's what Dominic Breazeale's kids are in there. So I don't know what term that is. I know it's not toddlers, but Young children. A grown-ass man basically talking shit to young children because they're polling for the fighter who they know, who they see their dad work out with all the time. That carried over to the post-fight press conference where Deontay Wilder was asked about Dominic Breazeale. And I guess there had been some jarring and stuff back and forth throughout the week, whatever. Nothing crossing the line. But Marsellos Wilder had brought up some of the trash talk that happened during the fight between him and Breazeale. Deontay was asked about it. And you can read the quotes myself, okay? I'm paraphrasing here. But Deontay basically said, you know, I'm going to get with him and not in the boxing ring. I'm going to confront him and not in the ring. You dissed my family. I got something to say to you. So they met in the lobby of the Westin Hotel later that night. And you guys have probably seen the videos going around on social media. Deontay Wilder didn't throw a punch. That's what I've been told from multiple sources. But his brother did. His brother Marsellos punched Dominic Breazeale back of the head, side of the head. He was looking away when he did it. And he punched him once, and then there were several love taps afterwards. I've heard from more than one person that Dominic Breazeale's wife was choked at one point. As you watch videos, you can hear his wife saying, there's children here, talking about their kids. And they basically, Breazeale didn't fight back. He talked, he jarred, but he basically got his wife and his kid and backed the hell out, and they got out of there. Look, this was in Alabama. This is where Deontay Wilder's from. He had family there. He had friends there. He says he doesn't travel with an entourage or whatever, but all those people in that lobby were all talking shit to Dominic Breazeale. You can see it on the video, and none of them were with Breazeale's camp. It was basically Dominic Breazeale, his wife, his kids, his trainer Manny Robles, and people like that. There was no entourage. He's from California. He's from out here. This wasn't his backyard. This is Wilder's backyard. So the statement released by Deontay Wilder that apparently Dominic Breazeale said, I'll fucking murder your family. I've met Dominic. I know his people not very well. I do know Gerald Washington and his people pretty well, really well actually. And just that whole group, they're very nice people. I don't think I've ever heard them swear. Like seriously, I don't think I've ever heard them say a bad word like fuck, which I say every other sentence. So I just can't imagine Dominic Breazeale sitting with his two kids and his wife saying, I'll fucking murder your family to Marsellos Wilder. I just can't picture it. And it doesn't quite add up to all the witness accounts I've heard and the video evidence that we've seen. Okay? So I think that, and apparently this isn't the first time this has happened with Deontay Wilder. Apparently there's been domestic violence issues in the past, and there's been issues with a melee involving another fighter in the past. And Marsellos Wilder, there's issues with him, and he seems to kind of be the spark plug here in this. And sometimes brothers get brothers in trouble. Sometimes younger brothers get older brothers in trouble, or vice versa. And I can attest to this because I have a younger brother. It's something that happens. And for Deontay, it seems like his brother Marsellos is a bad egg, and there's a history here, and this isn't a good look, okay? I could go off and make a big crazy rant about this, but it's already been done several times. I think the onus is on the WBC to make an example of this situation. Now, to make it clear, Deontay didn't throw a punch. As far as I know, he didn't even communicate threats. He talked some shit, and his brother was the asshole. And from the eyewitness accounts I've heard, his brother should have been arrested. But the promoter, Lou DiBella, and the police there, again, this is what I'm being told by multiple people who have no bias, no reason. They're not with either camp. They were just fans who went to the fight. I've been told that basically Lou and the police kind of pushed everybody away and almost kind of protected the Wilders in this situation. So it's up to the WBC to make an example. This is your heavyweight, quote-unquote, champion. So make an example. Whether it's a suspension for 3 months, whether it's a fine. I remember Adrian Broner getting in trouble for saying Mexican, African. Remember the can man shit? He got in trouble. That wasn't as bad as what Deontay Wilder did here. An example has to be set. I don't care if he didn't throw a punch. He was part of it. You see him in the video. And here's what I don't get about Deontay and his supporters in this. And by the way, a lot of the YouTube channels that I talk about all the time, the LDBC or whatever the hell it is, these guys are being silent on this. They're being mum on this whole thing. And a lot of them had press credentials to that fight and had unlimited access. These guys were going back into training rooms and shit. So they have friends in that world, that PBC world, that are hooking up those credentials, and not just press row credentials, but like backstage pass, the whole deal. And they're being really quiet on this. Not at all surprising, right? Funny how that shit works. But we've seen guys punished for doing much, much less than this. And we've seen the WBC bend over backwards to protect people in the past. They need to set an example here. If you're Deontay Wilder, you're a moron for getting involved in this. You're a public figure. Maybe not, he could probably walk down the street in LA and a lot of people wouldn't know who he is unless you're a boxing fan. But in Birmingham, Alabama, people know who the hell you are. So to get yourself involved in something like this, in a hotel lobby where there's 100 people, and they all have cell phones. Everybody has their damn phone and they're doing this. Aw, shit. World star, motherfucker. You got to be half a fucking moron to get yourself involved in something like this. He's not thinking. Think. And a lot of the defenders I'm seeing on Twitter are like, yo, man, that's that hood mentality. You got to be hood. You know what I'm saying? That's that gangster in him. He's a gangster. He can't help it. Let me tell you something. I may not talk like it. I might not act like it because I've wanted better for myself in my life. I grew up in the fucking hood. I'm from the hood. I grew up around gangsters. I grew up around that shit. A real gangster, a real hood mentality, a real dude that's got that hood mentality about him doesn't do this shit. A fake gangster, a wannabe hood mentality motherfucker pulls shit like this when there's a bunch of people around to take pictures and squash it. A real motherfucker with a real hood mentality that's really from the street wouldn't run up on a dude in front of his kids and his wife in a public place. He'd roll up on him when he was alone and deal with it that way, when no one could see. That's how you spot the difference between a real and a fake. It ain't about how you talk. It ain't about how you dress. It ain't about cornrowing your hair and tatting your shit up and saying the instead of the. It ain't about that. It's about how you act in real situations. And seeing how this person acted here shows you just how hood or how gangsta he isn't. Moving on. More sanctioning body madness in the middleweight division. The WBO has decided that Antondil Kurtsidze, who is supposed to be the mandatory for Billy Joe Saunders, is now going to fight for their interim title against Tommy Langford on April 22nd over in the UK. I feel bad for Kurtsidze, man. He beat Antoine Douglas, scored that 10th round TKO last March. He's going to have to wait 13 full months before he fights for an interim title. He should be going right to Billy Joe Saunders. That fight should have already happened. I think he's going to win this fight, obviously. At least he should. He's fighting against Tommy Langford, a guy... look, for Kurtsidze, he only had that one fight last year. Langford had 3 fights last year. He won a split decision last November to win the BBBC British middleweight title. So he comes with some credentials. He's 18-0 with 6 knockouts. He really hasn't fought anybody, though. His resume is shit. Kurtsidze, Antoine Douglas, better fighter than anybody Langford has fought. But also, people forget, he fought Hassam Nadam back in 2010 for the WBA interim title over in France. And that was a close competitive fight. I felt that Indom won it, clearly, but it was a close competitive fight, and I think Kurtzise has gotten better since then. Here's the thing. You got a 5'4" fighter who hasn't fought in over a year going up against a younger 6-foot fighter in his homeland. So you could see a decision thing kind of happen here, and I favor Kurtzise to win this fight by decision. But we could see a crazy situation here where Langford wins a disputed, controversial type of decision over there, some home cooking, which generally over in the UK, they get it right. They really, really do. But if he wins that, then you got Saunders with the full title, Langford with the interim title. Obviously, they're going to try to link up and do a domestic kind of fight there. And that Saunders-Golovkin fight or Saunders-Canelo fight that everyone's been hoping would eventually happen, it probably won't if this situation pans out the way I think it might. So that's what's going on with the WBO. Let's see. Any other news and notes? Oh, you know what? Can I just comment on one thing? And then we'll get into the fight review from last week. The PBC on Fox broadcast. You guys had some issues, man. It's been tweeted out a million times, so I'm not going to show it right here. You guys, I think I tweeted it out. They misspelled Detroit. Tony Harrison is from Detroit, so they were showing his hometown, and they spelled it Detriot, Det Riot. You really shouldn't misspell. It's not like he's from a small town in the middle of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He's from Detroit. Detroit is a known city around the world, okay? It's not what it once was, but as far as name recognition, people know how to spell Detroit. There's also this thing called spell check. On top of that, when Virgil Hunter was talking in the beginning of the broadcast with Brian Kenny, they kind of had that graphic that showed his credentials, who he is, blah, blah, blah. It said he's the trainer of Gennady Golovkin. Now look, Gennady Golovkin is not a PBC fighter. And I don't know how you can make a mistake like that. It'd be one thing if it said he was the trainer of, I don't know, Keith Thurman, like a PBC fighter, something. But to say Gennady Golovkin, I almost wonder if it was like a troll on purpose. If whatever intern they hired or something wanted to play a joke or something. I don't know, but that is a major, major fuck up. It's pretty funny, but how can you, whatever budget cuts you've made, and there's been plenty because I know people who were tied to the PBC in the background who've told me they were cut. They lost their job because of budget cuts. And there's several of them I know. Whoever you guys got to replace them for free, obviously, you need to teach them what spell check is, and you need to teach them what box rec is so they can double check on shit like that before they post it on national television. Anyway, let's review the fights from last week. So there were a few fight cards on Friday last week. Let's start in Canada, in Quebec City. I talked about this before. Eleider Alvarez scores a 5th-round knockout over Lucien Boutte. He is now 22-0 with 11 knockouts, and he is supposed to get a fight scheduled with Adonis Stevenson, finally, after being a mandatory a zillion times and winning a billion interim mandatory eliminators. They're supposed to come to an agreement. As I said before, I think March 24th is the date. And for Adonis Stevenson, right now, he has a fight scheduled for April 29th on the calendar, but it's against TBA. So depending on how their deal shakes out, maybe Adonis will scrap that tentatively scheduled April 29th card. Maybe he'll fight somebody still, who knows. As of now, and look, it's only 8 weeks away. As of now, that 4/29 date, on the schedule it says TBA. So more to come. When that fight finally does happen, I think it'll actually be fairly entertaining. I don't know if Alvarez has the power or strength to keep Adonis Stevenson off of him. I think that it'll be competitive early. I can see Stevenson stopping him late. At least that's how I feel now. We'll see when we get closer to it. I might break it down more. Here in California, in Temecula, Justin DeLoach scores a 2nd-round knockout over Christopher Pearson. DeLoach is now 17-1 with 9 knockouts. He's come a long way since that lone loss, that TKO loss he had back in 2015. He dropped Pearson in the second round before stopping him. Pearson's one of those guys. Look, I covered him. I talk about this a lot, I know, but I worked a beat for the Los Angeles Matadors back in like 2010, 2011, and Christopher Pearson was one of the guys on that team that was one of the better fighters when he was on that team. And he came with a lot of credentials because he came from a good system in Michigan, a good amateur system. He went to Northern Michigan. There's a good program there. He definitely has good schooling. However, when he went pro, he signed with Mayweather Promotions, and he just hasn't progressed. And it's the matchmaking. He hasn't been brought along the right way. Him and his team, I don't know what it is, but on paper, this guy had a real shot of doing something. But he just kind of hit a plateau and fizzled out. He let's see, what was his amateur record? 93-8. So he didn't have a long amateur career, but it was a good one. He won a lot of tournaments. He looked really good in the amateurs. And with the experience he got in the World Series of Boxing, it just looked like he really could have did something. But this is why you see guys coming out now like Shakur Stevenson, who didn't go the route Christopher Pearson went. They're going to the guys like Top Rank who know how to build and develop prospects. So it's interesting, man. These guys coming out now, they're looking at guys like Christopher Pearson. They're learning from their mistakes. Pearson, look, he fought once in 2016 in April. DeLoach fought 3 times. Activity matters when you're a prospect. For DeLoach, you know, in 2015 when he lost TKO, people wrote him off. Too many people are too quick to do that for prospects. He came back and scored a big win here, and I think he's a guy to keep an eye on, a guy to look at, and he's improved over the last couple of years. He's improved since that loss. Sometimes a loss makes a fighter better. It's not the end of the world. So this is a guy I'm interested in again, and you should be too. He's someone to keep an eye on. Also Friday, Cecilia Braekhus wins again in Oslo, Norway, in front of a big crowd. She does big crowds over there, man. She's a star over there in that part of the world. For a female fighter, really does well for herself. And she's defended her titles now a bunch of times. She's unified all the titles in that division, and I get it. Women's boxing isn't a very deep talent pool. The welterweight division really doesn't have any names. Braekhus doesn't knock people out. She doesn't have power. I know I'm butchering her last name. I just say Braekhus. I know so don't get mad at me. I know I'm not saying it properly. But based on her accomplishments, she's kind of in Vladimir Klitschko territory. She's kind of in Bernard Hopkins territory, where she's reigned over a weak division, but done so for so long, unified the titles, defended them for so long. She's a very accomplished female fighter. And I tweeted out about this before her fight that, you know, if she wins this fight, Ring Magazine needs to put her on the cover. And it was not a shot at Ring Magazine, but when they put Ronda Rousey on the cover, was it last year or 2015? I can't remember. That just didn't quite sit right with me. And I understand that magazines are in the business to sell magazines. I do these videos every week. I do this show for a magazine. I write for it. I contribute to it. I understand. But I think Ring Magazine hit a low with that. And someone like Braekhus isn't a name here in America, and I understand that. But part of the reason she isn't a name in America is because publications over here don't talk about her. In Boxing Monthly, hold us accountable. We could talk about her more too. So it's just something where I've told you guys before, I'm not a huge female fight fan, but I recognize greatness when I see it. And based on her opposition and what she's been able to accomplish, Cecilia Braekhus is a very accomplished female fighter. First ballot Hall of Famer, 5 years after she retires, and she needs to start getting more recognition. And by the way, if you don't know, because some of you might not realize this, she speaks perfect English. She speaks several languages. So she's extremely marketable. And the Western, I shouldn't say Western publications because she's a European-based fighter, but this side of the pond, in the UK and on this side of the pond, the boxing media could do a better job talking about her. So That's it with the action on Friday. Now, Saturday, of course, there was a PBC on Fox card, which I've talked about a little bit. But let's delve into the TV opener. Dominic Breazeale scores a come-from-behind victory, fifth-round knockout over Ugonoh, who I was really interested in seeing in this fight. And the first few rounds looked pretty good. At the time of the stoppage, Ugonoh was up 38-36 three times after 4 rounds. So he was doing the better boxing. He was the more athletic guy, the faster guy. When both fighters would jab or throw right hands, his shots got there a full second before Breazeale's. Let's see, Breazeale was dropped in the 4th round. Ugonoh was down in the 3rd round and then twice in the 5th round before being knocked out. This was a fun fight, man. This was a fun heavyweight fight. I talked about this in a rant video I did that night, actually, driving home from a bar. So I posted that, check it out. But for Ugonoh, I still think that there's some stuff he can work on. He has some good fundamentals at times and had a good start. But man, he was a front runner. After the first few rounds, he was gassed. And I think he fell in love with his power a little bit. And it was so easy to hit Breazeale that I think he just thought he was eventually going to get him out of there. Breazeale showed what heart and determination and experience can do for you. Now, I get it. He's the bigger guy, much bigger guy. And it's hard to knock out a guy who outweighs you by 30 pounds or so. But it's not like Ugonoh is an Amir Mansour type, right? Ugonoh is like 6'5", I want to say 230, and he's muscle. He's stronger in terms of just physical athletic strength than Breazeale. Breazeale might have better brute strength just because of his natural size. He might be able to do one deadlift heavier than Ugonoh, but as far as doing a continuous workout, you'd think Ugonoh would have better stamina and better strength over the long haul. But this came down to Breazeale, who this was his comeback fight from the tough beatdown he took against Anthony Joshua last year. Even though he's not a very experienced boxer, he has more experience, at least as a professional, than Ugonoh, who started as a kickboxer. And some of these guys from other martial arts think they could just come over into boxing and it's a piece of cake. Not so. There's difference in the stamina that boxing requires. People talk about mixed martial arts and kickboxing and wrestling and all this other stuff, and how this part of MMA might be tougher than boxing or this part of kickboxing might be tougher. You talk to any of these guys, they will tell you straight up and down, the endurance boxing requires, the physical conditioning and endurance it requires is superior to every other martial art. Yeah, I'm going to say it. I'm going to double down on it. It's the truth. These championship fights go 12 rounds. You're on your feet the whole time. And when you're a heavyweight dealing with a big man leaning on you, hitting on you, pushing you, trust me, endurance plays a role. And Ugonoh just looked like a guy who wasn't used to boxing endurance in a tough fight like this and fundamentally broke down. Fun fight, great performance by Breazeale. He's never going to be a top 10 heavyweight. He's never going to win a world title. He's never even going to land a lucky Sunday punch and win a world title. He's not going to knock out anybody with his punching ability or offense. It's going to be his heart and determination and his chin. He's got a good chin. That's going to help him eke out some upset victories like this from time to time against guys who don't have the experience or fade after a quick start. So I thought that was a fun opener to this broadcast. And then in the co-main, Jarrett Hurd wins an IBF 154-pound title, the title that Charlo vacated when he moved up to middleweight recently, scoring a 9th round TKO over Tony Harrison. What made this fight interesting is that Tony Harrison, who is a good, athletic, slick boxer, I thought won the first 6 rounds pretty clearly. They were close, they were competitive, But he made Jarrett Hurd, in my opinion, look amateurish in spots. I thought that he was boxing circles around him in spots for the first 6 rounds. But Hurd was doing some subtle, good stuff in there as a professional fighter. He was stalking and pressuring the hell out of Harrison. He was getting in some body work. He was getting in some chopping inside punches that were kind of landing on the side of the head. They weren't landing flush, but they were slowing Harrison down and making him think. And you just started to see Harrison wear down. And I thought that Hurd won the 7th round big. He won the 8th round big. He hurt Harrison. And Harrison wouldn't hold. I don't know if he was trying to be brave. I don't know if he was panicking. I don't know if he was trying to play it off and play psychological games with Hurd, or if he was giving up, mentally breaking down. I don't know, because a guy with his schooling coming up in that crunk system, he should know to hold when you're hurt. He should know that. He wasn't doing it. And in the 9th round, Hurd got him out of there. And I ranted about this in that same video. I invite you to check it out if you haven't already. This fight to me was a perfect example of a great amateur fighter versus a great, I shouldn't say great, a good amateur fighter versus a good professional fighter. Hurd made so many mistakes and was exposed to a degree as far as his style and ways that you can exploit it. And as I've said, he's a prospect with a title now. So none of this, when I say exposed, I'm not saying it like he's done. He's exposed, he's shit. He's a prospect. He's got 9 great rounds of footage to go back and watch and improve on. So this was actually a great learning lesson for him. In retrospect, Tony Harrison was perfect matchmaking for Jarrett Hurd. The PBC matchmakers hit a home run on this one because Jarrett Hurd's going to be so much better having gone through this experience. But for Harrison, the first 5 rounds of that fight, if that was a 5-round amateur fight, he would have won running away. I don't know if Hurd would have scored a point in that fight. It would have been like 20-0 in the amateur scoring system, right? I'm not, well, it's not a 10-point must, right? I'm talking about tournaments where you're getting scores for every blow you land that the judges see, okay? So I think it was almost a whitewash in the amateur kind of system. But then 6th, 7th round comes around and Harrison starts breaking down, slowing down. He can't keep up the pace. And Hurd had the conditioning, the endurance to go 12 hard rounds of professional boxing in this fight. And it's just, there's a difference in style, man. Some guys are built for the amateurs. They're front runners. They slap at their punches. They're athletic and they can move and they can do some slick, impressive shit. They can make super cool Facebook Live videos of them training and hitting focus mitts. But then there's those other guys who are built for the professional game. And that's what we saw with Jarrett Hurd. So I actually am do I think he's ready for the Charlos? Do I think he's ready for Irizlani Lara or even a Demetrius Andrade right now? Hell no. Those guys would chew his ass up. Wouldn't even be a close fight. The most he could do is maybe chop them down late and hurt them and score a knockout, but he'd be way down on the cards, right? He needs more seasoning, but there's potential there. If he can improve on some of the fundamental flaws he makes, and he can fix some of the things he was messing up on during those first 6 rounds against Harrison, and tighten that up, that combined with his toughness, with his determination, with his stalking pressure, we're going to have a pretty damn good fighter on our hands. So that's a prospect to keep an eye on. He holds a world title right now. He's not a champion. He's a baby contender. I still look at him as a prospect. For Tony Harrison, I just don't see where you go from here. He can serve as a guy, that mid-range kind of fringe contender guy now to see if a prospect is for real or not. And you need those guys in boxing. And Tony is a good fighter as far as his skill set. He can give you rounds. He can force a guy to learn on the job like he did with Hurd. So He could serve a purpose here, but he's just one of those guys that's just never going to win a world title. He just doesn't have that second half of a professional fight in him. The same thing that happened against Willie Nelson happened here. He started out even better against Hurd than he did with Willie Nelson, but it all broke down, man. That's the difference between the amateurs and the pros. Main event, Deontay Wilder scores a fifth-round TKO over Gerald Washington. He knocked him down in the fifth round. Washington got up. It was in bad shape. And Wilder just started teeing off, throwing all kinds of crazy windmill punches. Some landed. A lot of them didn't. But Washington was still in no shape to continue. I thought the ref looked a little jumpy to stop it. But in retrospect, seeing it in slow motion, seeing the condition that Washington was in, it was a good stoppage. And Washington didn't complain about the stoppage at all. So I think a good stoppage in retrospect. For Wilder, I've talked about him too much already in this damn episode. When you consider what he's done since winning that world title in January of 2015, he's had 5 defenses now. Eric Molina, Johann Duhaupas, Arthur Szpilka, Chris Arreola, and now Gerald Washington. And now he'll probably get suspended and sit on the shelf over the summer. And in the fall, he'll fight Bermane-Stiverne again. So 2015, 2016, 2017. Those 3 years. Bermane-Stiverne twice, Eric Molina, Johann Duhaupas, Arthur Szpilka, Chris Arreola, Gerald Washington. That's a pretty bad run of opponents. And that's not to put down any of those people he fought. For stay busy fights, for mandatory type fights and situations like that, some of those names are just fine. For last second replacements, when a guy fails a drug test, these names are fine. Several of these guys, I believe, came into the fight with Wilder with undefeated records, or good-looking records, I should say, at least on paper. But when you break down what's behind the record, you're like, wow. If at the end of this year, all we see from Wilder in 2017 is fighting Gerald Washington and Bermane-Stiverne again, he might be one of the weakest heavyweight titleists of all time. Now, we've had worse heavyweight titleists, we have. But they held their title for 6 months, for a year. They held it, and their first defense, they lost it, right? I'm not talking about one of those guys. I'm talking about someone who's actually held on to a major title for 3 years or more, which is what Wilder would do if he holds on to this title till next January. That'll be 3 years holding the WBC heavyweight title. Now, I want you to think about a heavyweight titleist that held a title for 3 years or more and had a worse run. I honestly can't think of one in the modern era. We can go back to the old timers. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the current modern era with different sanctioning bodies and all this stuff. I honestly can't think of one. And we've had some bad ones. John Ruiz had a better run than Deontay Wilder's had. So, look, Joseph Parker, who holds, I think, the IBF heavyweight title, he made the trip. Or he trains in Vegas and stuff like that. So he drove down and, flew out to Alabama to watch that fight. He was ringside. Deontay Wilder talked after the fight about wanting to unify titles with Joseph Parker. Joseph Parker wants it as well. Are we going to see it? Are we going to see it this year? I don't think so. That's just so disappointing. I feel like you go back to January 2015 when Wilder won that title. The situation in the heavyweight division at that point, where Vladimir Klitschko was the champion and Wilder had a title. The fight that was starting to build up eventually would have been Klitschko and Wilder. And now that got blown up, and now there's this crazy thing going on where there's titles all over the place, and you have this insane situation with the WBA where Joshua and Klitschko are going to fight for the real WBA title, and then there's this regular title with Shannon Briggs and Fresno Kendo. So the winners of those two bouts are going to be held up fighting each other. And that fight might not happen this year. You know, the eventual tournament of the WBA, that might not be sorted out until 2018. Just every time we have like a little momentum going, it's just fuckery that happens that prevents what we need from happening. You know, there's some interesting fights to be made in the heavyweight division. Say what you will about Deontay Wilder and all of his flaws. He has the eraser in that right hand. He is athletic. He is fast. And if he fought Joseph Parker, Vladimir Klitschko, Anthony Joshua, Alexander Povetkin, eventually if that could be worked out, Luis Ortiz, any of those fights, I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see any of those damn fights. I just don't know with all this stuff I talked about in this episode if we're going to get to it anytime soon. But Deontay Wilder, it looks like his year 2017 is going to be another waste. And he has to be the weakest heavyweight titleist to hold a title 3 or more years. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, guys. If you could think of someone that outdoes him, but he might be the worst. But that is enough of that. Let's get into the preview for this week's fights. This Saturday in the O2 Arena in London, it's David Haye versus Tony Bellew. I know that this is an important fight, right? Boxing Monthly, we pretty much dedicated our entire February issue to this fight, previewing it. But I can't help but think that this is pretty much Haye Chisora 2. You remember when David Haye and Derek Chisora fought in 2012, how that turned out. That's kind of what I see here. The only difference is, this is 5 years later. And for David Haye, he's only had a handful of fights in recent years. He had no fights between 2013 and 2015. He had 2 fights last year against absolute trash opponents, right? The only elite fighter he's ever faced was Vladimir Klitschko in 2011, and he was completely shut out. He won 2 seconds of that fight, literally, where he landed 2 good, solid, hard punches on Vladimir. The other 11 3/4 rounds, he lost. He wiggles himself into fights like this, exciting, entertaining, domestic level matchups like this. This won't be the first time. I mentioned Chisora. There's been other ones in the past. He wiggles himself into fights like this, gets big paydays, looks good, keeps his face pretty, goes back into his commentating gig. More power to him. And if the fans like it, and they want to go to this fight, and by all accounts, this is going to do a good crowd, a good gate. It's going to do a good TV rating. Haye and Bellew have hyped the hell out of it. And there's been all kinds of crazy antics in the lead up. So I think this is going to do good business. But I know some of the British fans get mad at me when I say this. David Haye was a pretty good cruiserweight. He was briefly the legitimate cruiserweight champion. He didn't really set a precedent there and stay there and defend his lineal, unified, undisputed championship a bunch of times. He kind of won it and moved up in weight. And as a heavyweight, he's a complete fraud. Yet, there are still people to this day that will say, oh, he'd fuck up half the top 10 heavyweights. Okay. Well, he hasn't fought any of them. Anyway, he's fighting David Bellew here, who former light heavyweight, former cruiserweight. He's only been KO'd once, and that was by Adonis Stevenson in 2013. The thing with that fight, it wasn't just some lucky punch. He was dominated in that fight. I think that fight was 5 rounds. He lost all 5 rounds. And then also in 2013, I'm just trying to think of other good fighters he's faced. Tony Bellew fought Isaac Chilemba twice. He had a controversial draw with him, I think in early 2013, and then won a rematch, clearly, by clear unanimous decision. So those are the two good fighters Tony Bellew's faced. That was at light heavyweight. At cruiserweight, he's fought very weak opposition. There was the fight with Nathan Cleverly, but this is, it's a faded version, just not the best version of him. And that's probably the best opponent he's faced, right, at cruiserweight. So now he's moving up to heavyweight, and he's fighting a guy who's been fighting at heavyweight for a decade on and off, who is settled at that weight, punches pretty well at that weight, actually, and has speed and athleticism. I just don't see how this goes past 5 or 6 rounds. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Maybe David Haye has been so inactive and hasn't fought a good fighter, a fighter as good as Bellew in so long that Bellew can put something on him and give him something to think about and wear him down. I will say this, the later this fight goes, that benefits Bellew. So if this thing goes past 6, 7 rounds, it's going to get really, really interesting. And that's where I think Haye could start to tire out, and Bellew could score a late stoppage. It wouldn't blow my mind to see that. But if I'm a betting man, I'm betting Haye by knockout within 6 rounds. Also on that card, Sam Eggington is fighting Paulie Malignaggi for the WBC International title. Paulie kind of toes the political line, doing some of the commentary he does over there for the network over there in the UK, and it's panned out for him. So he's got a fight there for a WBC International title, whatever the hell that is. Now, the big card this weekend that I'm excited about, and I actually am really excited for this fight, Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman. I did a breakdown video, just a short prediction video. It's on my channel. While I was chilling in the jacuzzi at the hotel this past weekend, slightly cringeworthy video because I'm sitting in a jacuzzi with a selfie, holding a camera or my phone. I held my phone like this for a few minutes and just talked in it. I was having a few cocktails, chilling in a jacuzzi, so it's slightly cringeworthy. But it's not like I panned out to where you're seeing my chest and shit, okay? It's at least cropped in, so check that out. I'm not going to give too much details here because, like I said, I talk about it a lot in that video. But I keep going back and forth on this fight. Here are the X factors. Keith Thurman only fought once in 2016, hasn't been very active. He had an injury last year. He's blown up in weight a little bit. And some of the way he's been talking in interviews, he said things like, I don't care if I win this fight or lose this fight. I'm good either way. I'm set. I've done well for myself financially and blah, blah, blah. Is he checking out? Is he losing interest in boxing? Sometimes it seems like it. I know he was frustrated last year with the inactivity and fights being delayed and stuff like that. He's publicly shared his frustration. Then you look at Danny Garcia, who's just kind of all business. There's no frills to him, but he fought twice last year. For the most part, he's been pretty active. And top to bottom, if you compare his resume to Keith Thurman, he's fought much, much better opposition. Yes, most of it was at 140 pounds, but still, he's faced the better opposition. And in my opinion, he throws the shorter, straighter punches. So, but let me include this. He does have trouble with boxers. He has trouble with guys who can jab from the outside and know how to box and know how to move their feet and use angles. Guys like Mauricio Herrera gave him fits and, got robbed against him on the scorecards. Keith Thurman doesn't really fight like Herrera that much, but there are some similarities in the angles and the movement. I think Thurman has faster feet, he has faster hands, and if he boxes smart and disciplined from the outside and fights a slow-paced, technical fight, I think Thurman will win a close, controversial decision. There might be a lot of fans out there that think Danny Garcia deserves a decision, but Keith Thurman gets it. That's where I feel right now at the time I'm filming this. Now, If we see the weigh-in Friday and Thurman looks dead or something like that, I'll change my pick. But as of right now, that's just the way it feels for me. Most of us will probably think Danny Garcia did enough to win this fight, but Keith Thurman's the house fighter. He's the bigger name. He's more marketable. I can see him getting the nod. That's just how I feel, man. Also, Andres Fonfara is fighting Chad Dawson in the co-feature. I like this fight. I think it's going to be an interesting style matchup, but ultimately I think Fonfara is going to knock Dawson out. Fonfara got knocked out in his one fight last year against Joe Smith Jr. He got knocked out in one round. It was a bad knockout, but it wasn't a beatdown. It wasn't a systematic beatdown where he got beat up and was changed as a fighter. He got knocked out by a big, strong guy, Joe Smith Jr., who can punch. We saw what Joe Smith Jr. did to Bernard Hopkins. No one's ever done that. Not even Sergey Kovalev did that against Hopkins, right? So Joe Smith can crack. Fonfara got just knocked out, got hit clean with a shot he didn't see coming in the first round of a fight. He's taken time off. He's 5 years younger than Chad Dawson. Dawson is a southpaw. He has some slickness, some craft. At one point, he was a good fighter. But, man, in 2012, when he killed himself to go down to super middleweight to fight Andre Ward, he gave every concession to Ward. That fight was over in training camp. Dawson was knocked out in training camp for that fight. He was blacking out trying to make weight. So after that fight, he's just been done. From 2012 to present, he's 3-3 in his last 6. He had one fight in 2015, one fight in 2016. I think this will be a fun fight, an interesting fight for a few rounds, and then we see a knockout of the year contender. Fonfara wins it. Let me know what you guys think. Comment below, like, share, subscribe. Man, this was a long episode. I need a big drink of water. Like I said, I'll add some timestamps. So I hope you guys appreciate the long-winded episode, and I'll see you at the fights.